Hello and howdy. Happy Friday, everyone, if it's still Friday for you, wherever you're watching from. My name is Alyssa Nichol, and I am so excited for our second episode of today. Before we get into that, though, I just want to do a quick shout out for our host. So today's sponsor is Breebug, the team you call when your Angular app is 3 versions behind, your senior dev rage quits, and production is held together with duct tape and vibes. They do enterprise Angular, they do it well, and they probably won't even judge you. So check out breebug.com, and thank you for sponsoring. Without further ado, though, let's get into it. Our panelists for today are the amazing Mike Brocky. Hi, Mike.
I'm not talking. I'm leaving soon.
He's leaving soon. He doesn't love us anymore. And Justin Schwarzenberger. Hi, Justin.
I think he just lied. He just talked. So what's that all about? Yeah.
As well as our guests of honor. Cannot believe I get to do a show with you three beautiful, beautiful brains. I'm going to put you at top. Ben Taylor, Mike Ryan, and Brian Love. How are you all today? How are you doing?
It's so good to be
excited to be here. Yeah.
Usually I do a quick tell us about yourself in case the community doesn't know you. I don't know if you guys want to do a quick round of intros for yourselves individually as well as company as a whole, but we would love to hear more about that because Angular has been growing a lot lately and there's a lot of newcomers.
For sure. Yeah, we'll do intros and then I'll do a little intro of the company after the three of us go. But my name is Mike Ryan. I'm a Google developer expert in Angular. You've probably used my previous open source library, NGRX. I was one of the original code creators of that, and now it's in the wonderful hands of the NGRX team. And since then, I've been building generative AI applications with, well, we're about to show you, Hashbrown. And I'm joined with Brian Love and Ben Taylor.
Hey there. Super happy to be here. Brian Love, Google developer expert in web technologies and Angular. Just really excited to see Angular starting to pioneer the AI kind of conversation around generative UI with Hashbrown. And so we're just stoked to show you guys what we've been building. We've been working on this for a couple of months. We've tried to put a lot of polish into it for an alpha release. And so we want to show you what we have. We're just excited to hear from people in terms of like, what are some use cases that you're coming up with? What are some ideas? Like, how are you starting to like push things forward with UI and really building really meaningful user experiences using AI? Because that's what we're all about. And so we're excited to show you what we have, and we're excited to hear from y'all. Let's go, Brandon. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, potatoes. Everybody loves hash browns.
I feel like I always have to clear my throat right when I have to talk. Hi, my name is Ben Taylor. I am relatively new to Live Love App, but I've known Mike for several years now. We worked together at a smart lighting and industrial control company that had a big Angular app, big map, a lot of performance considerations there, so a lot of NGRX. And good to be here.
Yeah, and so this is the entire Live Love App team. We're a tiny Angular-focused consultancy working on generative UI, finance, AG Grid, NGRX. If you want to work with the three of us after watching the show, reach out to us at liveloveapp.com. If you don't want to work with us after the show, no big deal. I understand.
You just say hi.
I'm adding liveloveapp.com.
We can be friends. I mean,
there we go.
Awesome.
So tell us, first of all, how long have you three been working together? Because I know Brian and the Love app company for a while, but how did this perfect triune happen?
Yeah. I'll pick this one up. Yeah. So, I was formerly the CTO for Breebug, so it's kind of funny that they're sponsoring this episode. But nonetheless, so I stepped away from that role, just kind of wanted to do something really fun and exciting. And I think Mike and I started talking about what if we start to work together and build really cool developer tooling? That's something that we've always been passionate about. How do we make how do we push the conversation forward? And so we've done a lot of different projects together. We previously did kind of a startup around the observability space, and how do we maybe start the conversation around observability in the front end and kind of start there. It was a really fun experience. Things obviously didn't go exactly the way we had dreamed about when we started that. So this is not my mansion that I'm chilling in. Though it's a pretty nice co-working space.
Yeah.
But anyways, and then, so we've just always had a really good kind of relationship. We got to know each other through conferences and stuff. And we said, it'd be really fun to try working together. And what if we really focus on building like developer tools and starting to like push the ecosystem forward? And Mike can tell you a little bit more about how we got into the AI thing and all of that.
Yeah. So what was it? I think it was like December 2022 when ChatGPT came out. And Brian and I were with our families on the road for NG Rome when it dropped. And I remember going to my then girlfriend, who wildly went on this trip with me like 4 months into dating and now is my fiance. And I was like, this is incredible. Check out ChatGPT. And we spent just a huge chunk of our trip in Italy, just like playing with it, seeing what all it could do. It was using Jippity 3.5 at the time. And I got back home from that trip and I was like, okay, I really want to start building some tools with this. Like, what can this actually do? And so Brian and I kicked it off. We built this like little internal project called Italy. Brian and I are really big into mental health and believe in practicing mental health. And Italy was like a smart journal that used Jippity 3.5 to kind of help you organize journal entries. And it was a lot of fun to build. Tech was still really early, but it got our minds percolating around like, okay, where can we take this in the UI space? So when Brian and I then went to go build that startup that Brian mentioned, Polaris, we put, at the time, I think Jippity 4 had finally come out, and we put it everywhere. Like we were trying to create suggestions and recommendations and help you onboard into our product as easily as possible. Now, building an observability tool for the front-end developers, that proved to be an insurmountable challenge for us. But again, like we felt like the UI that we had built for it was really cool. Like, we loved how it suggested next steps and like you could get started with this tool really easily. And so, over the past 2 years now with our consultancy, we've just been doing this with our clients more and more, bringing AI into it, seeing how can we make these apps friendlier, more accessible, a little more usable. And to be honest with you, we've just gotten tired of writing all that setup code over and over again. And that's kind of where this idea of Hashbrown came out. We brought Ben onto the project late last year, and the three of us have been building Hashbrown since March of this year.
I mean, first of all, the logo and the website and the docs, I was just like, whenever I first clicked on the link, my mouth dropped. I was like, this is beautiful. So I don't know who's to thank for that.
Do you like the little skateboarder dude
I
on
love
the front?
it so
It's
much.
so cool,
I feel
man.
like all hash browns should come on wheels. I just do.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we have worked with the same designer. Her name is Ginny Sun. She's a Canadian-based graphic designer. We love her work. So definitely shout out to her. She's done all of our branding. And I also want to shout out like Brandon Roberts. He's on the call and the Analog.js project. That entire docs experience is powered by Analog and Angular, and we could not have done it without help from his team too.
So
totally.
I'm going to get what's the TLD? Hashbrown. I want to get it in the chat. .dev. Because,
and again, another shout out, because there's a developer in our community who owned hashbrown.dev, and I reached out to him like, hey, you have this domain.
That's right.
Like, I'm trying to make an open source project. And he's like, I've used NGRX. I love NGRX. Here you go. Here's hashbrown.dev. And just gave it.
Oh my God.
Like, he really believed in the project. So,
which is really cool.
Thanks to him too.
Now, tell us about Hashbrown, and do you want me to pull up docs or anything to show while we talk about it? Because it's just so exciting. I freaking love this product. I want it to blow up.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of hard to talk about since it's so conceptual. So would it be okay if I just kind of showed a demo and we'll talk about it as we go through it?
Absolutely, yes.
Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do a demo. Let's see some code, because that's where it's at.
Yeah. So the idea with Hashbrown, like I said at the top, is that we want to make it easy for developers to bring generative UI and like make apps that are friendlier or easier to use. There's a lot of conversation right now about where does AI fit into our lives and into our technology. And for us, like if AI could just make things easier to use, that would be really cool. Like that'd be a great application of UI if we're just a little bit faster at doing our jobs. And I think we feel that in our developer tools today. Like I get a big smile on my face when Copilot just like nails that function implementation, or I ask a question of Jippity and it just gives me the perfect response. And so it's like, okay, let's take that magic, that autocomplete feeling or that knowledge feeling, and bring it directly into our Angular apps that we're building. So I have a sample Angular app here. It's a smart home app, and inside of it, I have all of the lights configured for my apartment. And I also have some scenes that let me control these lights. And what Hashbrown does is it brings AI as a capability directly into our front end. So I'm going to start with some really small demos, and then we're going to like kind of build on top of it from there. So the first thing is like, you'll see that I have some lights in my living room called like these entertainment ambient lights. And I'm going to go create a new light real quick. Maybe I have bought a third one. Hue lights are expensive, so I buy them one at a time. And I'm going to call it this. And you can see that a completion has appeared directly in my form input. And I can hit tab to accept that completion. And then I can go ahead and add that light. And the idea here is like you might have some highly trafficked inputs where your users are trying to get some work done and there's some patterns to it. They are, performing maybe some similar work. And you can bring that same tab to complete you have in your code editor directly to those form inputs, helping your users kind of fill those out faster and complete your forms a little bit quicker. So let me jump to a little bit of code to show this, show how this works for the developer. I'm going to go to the light form component here. And Hashbrown is completely resource driven. So we are using the new resource interface in Angular 20 to give you a reactive primitive for doing things like completions and chat. So from Hashbrown, you'd import something like the completion resource. And the completion resource is all about text in, text back out. So Hashbrown works with a variety of AI providers. Out of the box, we support models from OpenAI, Google, and Writer. For this demo, we're going to be showing a lot of our demos using OpenAI's models. So you can see here that I've chosen the GPT-4o mini model, and then you give it some input signal. So I have a signal for whatever the user has typed into that name input. And then if you've not done AI engineering before, you might be surprised to learn that the majority of AI engineering doesn't happen in code, but actually happens in this system instruction. This is where you're telling the AI what you want it to do as part of its agentic flow. So here we're telling it, given this name signal, I want you to help my user generate a name for a light. The input's going to be whatever they've typed so far, so just predict what might come next. Don't include any other text, just that prediction. If it looks like it's already finished, don't do anything else. Just stop there. You don't have to generate anything. And then because this is all signal driven, you'll notice that this system instruction is actually itself a signal. So I'm using Compute to build this system instruction, and I'm providing it the list of light names that the user has already written into it. That's how it knew that I was trying to create ambient light number 3, because it knew I'd created ambient lights 1 and 2 before it. And what you get back out of this is just like a really simple signal that you can just throw directly into your Angular template and consume to build, like I said, those kinds of tab to complete experiences.
How hard is it to write natural language prompts in your code?
There is certainly an art to it. If you've not done any prompt engineering before, you might be surprised at just how much work it can be sometimes to get these prompts looking right. But one of the nice things is like this idea of prompting these has been around for enough time that the assistants are also pretty good at helping you. So like a lot of the prompts I'm going to show you, all we did was we went into ChatGPT and we said, hey, research best practices for writing prompts. Then we went and collected a bunch of information about those best practices. And we said, okay, given those best practices, write me a system instruction that does this. And it gives you a really great place to start that's kind of built on top of those best practices.
I love that. Thank you. That's really meaningful. I feel like a lot of integration is, like you were saying, going to require this skill.
Yes.
For sure. There's also a ton of resources out there. Like one of the great resources is also just the OpenAI documentation. It has a whole section on prompt engineering and really dives into it. So it's a great resource to look at as well.
Yeah, I was working on this with Ben recently, and he kind of described it as like talking to his 5-year-old, and kind of that's what it feels like you're doing.
Yeah.
It's like, no, don't. No, that's not what I meant. Do it this way. No, that's not what I meant. Don't just.
A lot of guardrails involved in building this.
How do I deal with the width of that text? Like my OCD is going to drive me nuts if I have to type out this prompt, but like I want to wrap these lines so I can read it nice, right? Does it deal with all that, right?
Yeah, it does. It does deal with all that. And one of the nice parts about Hashbrown is like, I think a lot of companies are going to feel like these system prompts are proprietary right now. And so Hashbrown gives you the choice as a developer to either embed it directly in your Angular code, or you can actually bring the system prompt into your backend if you want to maybe hide or mask those implementation details from your users. Otherwise, they can just kind of see whatever that system prompt is.
No, absolutely. And that's so thoughtful. And I honestly think you're right. They are going to be I think, guarded, especially if it's like
Yep.
part of your. It's almost like part of your code that's out on display, right? Like that you're like.
Mhm.
Yeah, I get the feelings about it. It's also quite easy to get these models to leak their system instruction when asked
Sure.
the right way.
Yeah.
And so like there's an entire GitHub repository of all of the system instructions for
Right.
all the AI chatbots. Like if you want to go see what the system instruction is for ChatGPT or
Mhm.
Claude Code, like those are on GitHub and you can go read them. I'd actually recommend it. It's a really good repository to see samples and get ideas of like how are the big
Yeah.
dogs in this space
It's good to study.
prompting their models.
Cool.
Then you also get into like 5-year-old guardrails, right? Don't touch that. Don't like if anybody asks you this question, don't tell them. You know, it's very similar to kind of basic protections.
Yeah, that's like when people sit there and say, well, it doesn't write Angular code well, right? It wrote Angular 15. It's like, okay, well, you just tell it, I want you to write Angular 20 code. Okay,
Yeah.
I got it, right? So those kind of little things. Yep.
It's that kind of thing. You kind of test, refine, test, refine, test, refine.
Yeah. Have you guys
Sure.
found a way of testing, like automating that testing, or is it still manual?
That's a good question.
We have some end-to-end tests actually in the Hashbrown source code where we're
Mhm.
experimenting with how you might test
Mhm.
system instructions. And I would say that our tests have like an 80% pass rate right now, which is to say that
Little
these models
flaky.
are so like non-deterministic that sometimes they're just going to hallucinate or like
I feel
it's really
like
hard to get them
80%
to
is
test.
not flaky, Brian. Excuse you. 80 sounds like
Oh,
shippable.
okay. Well, we did ship it. It's in the repo. You can go check them out.
Yeah.
Like, is this
All open
hitting
source.
the thing? Is it like, is this costing me money each time I run the test?
Absolutely. It's costing you
Yes. Yes.
It's a little bit different paradigm than like
Yeah.
testing my function, right? I can
It
run that thing
is.
2,000 times, didn't cost me
Oh my
anything
God, you're
if I have the
right.
machine,
is.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's gonna be one of the hard parts about building AI applications right now is that these AI providers, they have found a way to run electricity through a rock and charge you money for it, and they are charging
Yes,
you
they
a
have.
lot of money for that privilege. And
Yes.
but
Yeah.
the capability is just really impressive, and the apps that we can build with it are so cool that I think it's really worth it. I will say that we've all shared an OpenAI API key for developing Hashbrown. I think over the last 3 months, we've incurred maybe like $5 to $10 in charges amongst
It
the
hasn't
three,
been bad.
hitting it a lot.
Oh, okay.
And so
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that the expense is really all that outrageous. Definitely play with
Yeah.
it. It's easy to go introspect what your costs are and figure out how much a
Mhm.
feature or a set of tests are going to cost you.
Okay. Very cool.
But like you get started with Hashbrown and like have a lot of fun for just $1 of API credits.
Gotcha.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Can I show you what's next?
Yes. I'm
Let's
so
keep
excited.
So one of the things that Hashbrown does is it's trying to help you like do streaming LLM responses as nicely as possible. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into my scene page here, and I'm going to go create a scene for my living room lights. I'm going to call it something like dim living room to 40%. And what you can see has happened here in this form is we have generated a couple of suggestions for the user to help them fill out this form. It's picked all of the living room lights that I've created so far and saying I should add them to this scene with a brightness of 40%. And the way this is working is that LLMs aren't just good at generating text, they're good at generating structured data, and they're getting better and better at this as these AI providers are working on refining their developer tooling. So I'm going to show you the code. And inside of Hashbrown, you have access, in addition to a completion resource, what we call a structured completion resource. So a lot of this is going to look the same so far. You provided a model, then you give it some input signal that's going to cause this resource to recompute, and then a system instruction that is also itself a signal. The system instruction is basically like, hey, predict the lights that should be added to the scene based on the name, and then it just gives it all of the lights that are currently created along with their ID. And what comes back out is determined by this schema property. Yeah, Ben is the developer of what I'm showing next. This is called Skillet. Skillet is a schema language for defining what kind of data you want to get back out of your LLM. It's what we think the first LLM optimized schema language. So you can see here that I'm asking for an array of objects, and those objects are going to have the UUID of the light that should be added to this scene, along with the brightness that the LLM thinks we should set that light to. And so once I've got that predicted lights resource, well then in my template, it's easy to just like, use a for loop on the list of predicted lights and spit it out with an add button. Like you can just consume this directly in your Angular template. It's all really strongly typed. If I hover over light here, we can see that we're getting back an object with an ID and a brightness, and we're able to kind of consume this object back out. But one of the killer features here is its ability to handle streaming JSON. If you noticed, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to change that brightness back to 20%. And you can see we got all those suggestions sort of in one shot. We got them all back when the LLM finished responding. But these LLMs can sometimes be a little slow, especially if you start tapping into more advanced reasoning models where it takes them a while to think before they start generating content. And so with Hashbrown, we want to make it easy for you to start showing results back to your user as fast as possible. So if I go back to the schema for this, what I'm going to do is that with Skillet, anywhere in my schema, I can actually drop the streaming keyword. And what this does is it tells Skillet that as the LLM starts generating JSON that matches the inner schema, go ahead and emit it to me for me to consume.
Yep.
So now if I go back, create that scene, dim living, if I can spell living room to 20%. Now we're streaming those results right in and showing them as fast as the LLM thought them up.
One word. Oh, yeah.
Can you go bring the code back up real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Justin's like, I don't believe it. I don't
No,
believe
this
it.
is
Show
the
it to
point I
me
want to
now.
drive home for everybody to really
yeah.
help kind of reveal why the whole AI and all this stuff is very super amazing, right? The Skillet syntax that you have right there, right? If I just step back and think about it as a developer, let's say I wanted to query this data and I wanted to shape the data into an object. I need to think about all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, what am I going to name it? What's my schema going to look like? Here, you're literally writing human language to say, oh, I want to join between the light and the scene. I want the ID of the light to add. Go figure it out for me. I don't have to write any code to do that. I'm explaining it with language, and it's really easy for me to kind of explain that. And I don't even probably have to get that completely right? I could be the light to add as an ID, and it would still interpret and give me the thing I want.
That's really good.
So the speed that we can build and the things that we can accomplish by not having to be tied up in our paradigm of old syntax of actually writing syntax for JavaScript, C#, whatever, really opens the door for a lot. So I want to make sure everybody sees that. That's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to hit on the point of one of the things that Skillet does is if you have used these AI SDKs today, the de facto standard for this is Zod. And Zod is an incredible schema language. But the mission of Zod is to support 100% of the types of types you can describe with TypeScript, right? And TypeScript has probably one of the most powerful type languages in my experience across any strongly typed language. But these LLMs understand a small fraction of those type patterns. If you go read the documentation on what parts of the JSON schema spec these models provide or support, it's maybe 10 to 15 features. So when you're using Zod and these traditional AI SDKs, you can often get into a situation where you've described a schema that you think is working, but actually the LLM is ignoring half of the instructions that are encoded in that schema. A really obvious example to me is the Gemini models don't support min and max on numbers, for example. And so you could write min and max and think that the schema is going to constrain it, but really Gemini is just going to completely ignore those particular instructions. And so with Skillet, we're a lot less featureful than Zod, but we've chosen the subset of features that all of these LLM providers support. So you're much less likely to get into a situation where you've written some schema with Skillet that the LLM is silently ignoring.
Because I think that's the dangerous part, right? The silently, where you're unaware.
I had a conspiracy theory about this too.
Oh, can I hear it? I love conspiracies.
So if you pass in schema that Gemini doesn't support, Google's just I don't support that schema. But if you do it with OpenAI, it just silently accepts it.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this because the OpenAI SDK it's so good. The error handling is incredible. The types are incredible. So why does it silently error? And I think it's collecting all of that schema and all the outputs
to
and it's
retrain.
using it to train and improve the JSON schema capabilities.
Okay, because I've had this conversation, not directly about JSON schemas, but just about any prompt I give it, and it's cool, will do. but then it doesn't follow through. And then I come to have a conversation later and it's like, I don't have that capability. And I'm like, don't lie.
Yeah.
Don't lie. Like, just tell me. Just tell it straight up. Like I can't use that, or I can't do this. So but no, I like that. I think you might be onto something, Mike, with that.
I feel like they're trying to use a lot of these inputs to improve future outputs, and sometimes it comes at the cost of just not getting error messages when you're trying to do something that's actually not supported. But Skillet will help you avoid a lot of those pitfalls, or at least that's what we're hoping it'll do.
So cool.
Ready for the next step?
Okay, yeah, let's do the next one.
Let's go.
So I'm going to add the ambient light and the light strip, and I'm going to skip ambient light too. I'm going to hit add here and go back to my list of lights. And what we're going to do next with Skillet and Hashbrown is actually create some suggestions for the user on what they might want to do next. So you can see here that it's suggesting that I create some additional scenes with different brightness levels, but it's also, sorry about that, I live in the busiest intersection in all of Portland, and so sometimes some trucks are going to have something to say. So you can see that it's suggesting that I add that light that I forgot to the scene that I've just created. And I can hit accept on that suggestion and kind of speed up that workflow for my user. And, this is like one of the big ideas of Hashbrown. Like, let's help them get work done. We know what they're trying to do. So let's use these large language models to predict next steps when they complete actions inside of our app. And I'm using the word action intentionally because this is actually built on top of some classic NGRX code. So I'm going to go to the predictions component here. And this time I'm using Skillet to describe a schema of literally NGRX actions that are going to get dispatched. And with this schema, I'm then going to use it with a structured completion resource. And I'm just capturing whatever the last action is that's been dispatched to my NGRX store by some user interactivity. And then I'm passing it again to Jippity 4.1 saying, hey, you're helping predict what the next steps are going to be. Here's some important guidelines on what you should be doing. Here's some rules to follow. And then you can also have access to some tools to gather information about the app in case you think you need that additional context. And so this is something we've not actually shown yet with Hashbrown, but Hashbrown implements tool calling directly in the Angular framework. So if you've seen MCP, you might already be aware of what tool calling is. If not, let me break it down. LLMs have the ability to be described tools that it can call as part of its workflow when generating messages. So when I provide it tools like get lights or get scenes, and it's given some input where it thinks it might want to know what the lights are, it can instruct the developer to call a get lights function, and then it's up to the developer to generate a response, send it back to the AI, and then it'll finish generating its suggestion. We've implemented the entire tool calling flow for you with Hashbrown. So inside of my Angular app, I call create tool, and then I give it a name and a description. These can have arguments. We'll show arguments a little bit later, but then you give it a handler function that actually executes the work of whatever tool this is. And these are fully built into Angular's GI system. So I'm currently just using this to reach the smart home service, but I could have injected the smart home service directly. I have full access to dependency injection right here inside of these tools. I can call any Angular service that I've already authored inside of my app and just let the LLM call my service layer to read information about my app or control my app for me.
That's
kind of like MCP right in the browser.
How does it know the injection context?
Yeah.
That's inside a function of a function.
Yeah.
It's just wrap and run an injection context.
Magic.
Yeah, just some Hashbrown magic.
All right, perfect. A lot of butter, right? A lot of butter.
A lot of butter.
So much
A lot of butter, a little spice on top.
Listen, don't come here if your cholesterol's on the, fridge.
That's true.
Or if you're hungry or any of those things, right?
That's true.
Also, can we just elephant in the room that Thindle totally called out earlier? I've never heard someone say Jippity.
Oh, we always say
Is this a
Jippity.
thing? Is this a thing that I'm not a part of? What
GPT is just too
happening
long.
right now?
Is it a thing? We are making it a thing.
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
Okay,
Love
cool. I
calling
was
it Jippity.
some sort of secret
Jippity.
LLM convention, and you all got together, and I don't.
Wait, before I adopt this and start saying this, I need your take on, is it GIF or GIF?
I'm not answering. No comment.
Okay, then I guess.
Jippity when it comes to GPT.
I see that you'll have no comment on. That's
That's funny.
This is really sick though. So far, like even just, I'm so impressed. This is really cool.
Mike, let's show an example of that in the chat. Let's do the like who am I example and
You ready
show
to see
the
it in
actual
chat?
tool calling. Yeah, let's see it.
Okay. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna cheat for a second. I'm gonna hide some code from you, and I'm gonna go into this chat code for a sec and change a Boolean flag. I promise you I'll show you my magic trick in a second.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna ask it a question like, who am I? And you can see that it came back. You are Mike Ryan. You can reach me at mike@liveloveapp.com, especially if you want me to work on some Hashbrown with you. And let me show you how that's actually working inside of the code. So kind of building on top of our completion resources and our structured completion resource is a chat resource. And I've almost said that backwards because chat is the fundamental way that you interact with these LLM providers. One of the things that surprised me back in 2022 when I first started using Gipity 3.5 was that when you call the API, it actually works almost exactly like ChatGPT works. You give it a message history of user messages and assistant messages, and then the SDK generates what the next assistant message is in that chat context. And so before you go build like anything with AI, you actually have to think about chat and have some sort of state management solution for managing a chat history. So this is kind of that like building block that everything in Hashbrown is built on top of. So this works as again, we're using Gipity 4.1. And I'll come back to this debug name in a second, but it's got that system instruction. And then here are the list of tools. And I have listed here a get user tool that's injecting my auth service and returning whoever the currently authenticated user is to it, which is just going to be their name and email address. So I'm logged in as me. When I asked it, who am I? It knew to call this get user tool with very little instruction or prompting. It was just kind of able to figure it out based on the tools provided to it and create a really nice response back to me saying, hey, you are Mike Ryan.
And you didn't have to do anything to tell it like, oh, my property on auth email is the email property or the name property. No. Like it just figured all that out, right?
It looked at the JSON, the property names, the everything, and it's like, I know what this is. I've seen this before.
What happens if you do it to something that you haven't created a tool for?
Yeah, so if you don't have a tool for it and you ask it a question, it kind of depends on what the system instruction is, but like I could say like get the list of scenes, and there's no tool right now to get the list of scenes. And so it's, well, maybe it does have a list of scenes. Oh no, it's just spit out the list of lights. It's like, it's going to try and answer it. And this is like a good example where you'd want to go into that system instruction and give it some refinement and say, hey, if you're asking questions that you don't know about, like just don't respond. Which is a technique that works really surprisingly well.
Like not responding or like
ask,
saying
ask the user for the next question. Like, can you tell me?
I got you.
Like, you know, you kind of have to guide it sometimes. Yeah.
We've done it where it says, okay, if somebody asks you a question you don't know, respond politely that's not what your purpose is. Or, I mean, you can go into different ways. You can be snarky.
I like that you tell it to be polite. I feel like I'm working on an AI app right now. And I think I'm just going to be like, be as unhinged as you want, darling. Just like, go for it.
That's something that's going to vary model to model, you know? And something I was going to add, you asked, like, do you have to tell it that it's an email or does it just figure that out? And GPT does figure that out. I haven't gotten used to saying Gipity yet, as you'll notice. Anyway,
rolls off the tongue.
But some of, different models will handle it different ways. And, if you have a particularly complex schema, you might have to help it. And that's where that prompt engineering comes in, right? You might have to go say, hey, here's a date, time in this particular format, use it this way to kind of.
Can I ask what Ben Taylor's favorite model just across the board is? Just like for asking for a friend.
I would say the GPT family has been, sorry, I messed with it. Gipity, Gipity models are so far, they seem to figure out the tool calling the fastest.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, in terms of like DevX, it's rewarding, right? You don't have to quite help it along as much. It's like talking to my 9-year-old instead of my 5-year-old.
Beautiful.
It's true though. Like the OpenAI models right now are just really superior at figuring out flows with very little prompting. Whereas some of the other models, you maybe have to give it more examples of what it should do for it to figure it out.
Okay.
But yeah, I added that system instruction we were joking about. I told it, if you're asked a question on something you don't know, just say you don't know. Don't make something up. And
Wait,
then
is
when
it?
I
Are you
ask
going to
what's
show
are
us
there,
to do
it's
it?
like, I actually don't know anything about scenes anymore. And it's completely corrected its response here to you.
Oh, I love this.
So yeah, prompt engineering is a really strange skill in that you're just telling the computer in natural language how to behave, and it kind of listens to you in a lot of these cases.
So cool.
I try and tell people, like, think about it like this is how I think about it. I think about it like I'm talking to another developer or another person, and I'm helping coach them, right? And I'm like trying to get out of them what I want them to do, and I have to describe it to them as a human-to-human interaction. And if I think about it that way, I've had a lot of success to apply those skills I do in coaching to get the most out of this agent or whatever.
Really good analogy, because you might start out kind of with a general, like, well, hey, do it this way. And if that isn't enough, well, then you'll add more. And if that isn't enough, it's okay. Let me give you an explicit example. And you just kind of build on it from there until it clicks. So that's a really good analogy.
It was either Mike or Ben who earlier had mentioned something about how, like, the get-go, you have to know how you're handling like the state. Is that essentially just list of tools and prompts, aka our state, or is there like another part of chat state that I missed? As far as like,
So I mentioned that I'd say more about this debug name, and let me show you what this does. Because I've supplied a debug name, I can actually open up Chrome's DevTools here, and I can open up the Redux DevTools to introspect the internals of any resource that Hashbrown provides.
what?
So this is the resource powering this chat information, and we can kind of dig in and see what the messages are. We can see that the user asked what scenes are there. The assistant actually tried calling a tool. It got all of the lights just to see if there was any scene information inside of here.
Nice. Yep.
There was no scene information, and so it came back and said, I don't know anything about scenes. I really only know things about lights. So if you have a question about that, let me know. And that's one of the cool parts about Hashbrown is that you can really dig into and understand, like, what's the flow? What did the assistant do at any point? Because we do streaming, you can actually kind of step through it at different points, and you can see how that message changed over time. This is really handy for like debugging that structured data where you want to understand, like, at what step was I receiving chunks of like parsed JSON. And yeah, this is built into every resource that we have just kind of out of the box. We're managing all that state for you and letting you see it and visualize it.
And if you want to just filter this by success, you can just see, like, at the end here was, like, you see down at the bottom, there's generate message success. And this can be really helpful if you don't want to see all the chunks. If you just want to, like, okay, why am I getting this? What tool did it call? What was the response that I sent to it as a result of that tool? Allows you to really dive in and actually see every detail that's happening. And the Redux DevTools work pretty well because this is like a time, like, this is this thing that happens over time. And so you can kind of scrub through time, see those actions, and see the state being changed. So it works pretty well. It does slow down a little bit when you start throwing it like thousands of like actions in like a second, when the LLM is just like dumping mass amounts of data into the tool. And you'll like your browser starts like, using lots of resources. But so far, we think that the Redux DevTools is a great start for developers to use Hashbrown to debug. Because I think that's a big part of the user experience with a dev tool. It's like, okay, well, you gave me this tool. Now, how do I, like, when things don't go the way I expect, or I'm trying to figure things out, like, what do I do? And so the Redux DevTools was like an easy thing for us to kind of start with. And maybe one day there'll be additional dev tooling around this or something like that, or integration with the Angular dev tools. We don't know, but this is a great way to get started. So we really like it.
Oh, so cool.
Okay. Y'all want to see something that's even cooler than this?
There's nothing cooler than this, sir.
Listen,
let's go. Let's generate some UI.
Sorry, I'm already fighting with Ryan in the chat about who's excited, more excited. I can't.
So, like, I think a lot of people are building these chatbot wrappers right now because companies are really interested in this idea of doing RAG, which is this idea that you can give these LLMs a full brain of knowledge that they can reference and respond to users with. And so in a lot of contexts, having an automated assistant that has that knowledge is a really powerful experience. But for Hashbrown, we're like, man, chatbot's just kind of like, it's like customer service. And how much cooler would it be if instead of a chatbot, it were more like a command prompt? Like, what if chat could orchestrate my service layer for me, call tools, and then respond not with text, but the actual component layer of my application.
Yeah.
So earlier when I said I was going to hide something from you, I hid the fact that I set this simple demo flag to true, and I'm going to go ahead and reset that back to false, and we're going to use a more complex demo.
Okay, hang on. You have a variable to toggle.
Yeah,
How-
because it's just like,
We do a
it's
lot of
so
demos.
next level.
This is so cool.
Name it something more positive, like light the fire or something like that.
Yeah.
Actiony.
It's got to be
So this
Hashbrown
is-
themed.
A UI chat resource. And it's like a chat resource, only you give it your Angular components. And instead of responding with text, it's going to form every single response in the component layer that you expose to the LLM. So in this UI chat resource, I'm giving it the ability to render Markdown. And when I expose a component, I give it the component class. I give it a description so the LLM knows what it is it does. And then for any of the inputs that are on this component, I can tell the LLM how to actually bind data directly to that input. And I do that with Skillet. So I'm just using the Markdown component from, it's the NGX Markdown package on NPM. Like I didn't build it, and it has this data input. And so I'm telling the LLM that you can bind a string to this data input. And I can use that streaming keyword. So when I get to the demo, you'll see that it's going to actually like stream Markdown into that data input, and the component's going to be able to handle it. I'm also giving it the ability to show lights to the user, and I'm letting it pick out light icons. I ask it to set the ID of the light with the description, lists of lights, scenes, so on and so forth. I'm also giving it a list of tools that it's going to call as I'm interacting with this chat. So it's still going to be able to get the user, get the lights, and get the scenes, but it can also call tools with arguments. So for example, I have a control light tool here. And this one actually has some args. And so the LLM can pass in a light ID and a brightness to control any light. And again, I'm just tying this up into my service layer. So let me show it to you. Let's go into this chat. And I'm going to say, turn off the living room lights. You can see the LLM got our lights. Now it's running a script. I'll talk about that in a second. It controlled all the lights. So you saw them all turn off on the left here when it did that. And then it generated a response to me with my Angular component layer. It used the light list component to show me a list of lights, and it knew what lights were in the living room based on name and context alone. And like these are real Angular components. I can scrub to turn them off and on. You'll see them interact on the right. Like it's all tied into each other, real Angular components. As I mentioned, it does streaming, and all those inputs can actually have streaming inputs bound to them. So I'm going to say, write me a report about the state of my smart home. And now it's going to use all that information, and it's streaming Markdown into that data input. And the Markdown component is parsing that and rendering it in real time. Like I don't have to think about how to wire this all up together in my Angular app. Hashbrown is doing it all for me. Now I'll say something like, show me the scenes for the living room. Again, it's going to get back all that data, and now it's showing me all the scenes that I've created, and these are still the real like scenes that I can hit, interact with, and apply.
Yep. Mike, let's go
Well,
back
I
and show them how strongly.
I want to build a wizard that's not a chat window, but starts the user on, a little form and says, hey, go now.
Yeah.
And then it's going to take through and build out my components in a wizard UI journey.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did that, right?
Totally.
Yeah, you could totally do that with Hashbrown. Hashbrown is just a framework to give you the building blocks to do these kinds of things. And like Ben, Brian, and I's brains are kind of fried thinking about all the possibilities that this unlocks.
I see what you did
Right.
there.
I see what you did there.
Yeah,
That was good. That was good.
It was really good.
That was good. Yeah, I think at one point, I don't know, is it too early for this joke, Mike? But are forms dead? I don't know. Like, could we put a tombstone up on a slide deck and say like,
we are
forms
not putting
done?
any tombstones on any slide deck.
Can
You're
we
not
do
going
it?
to bake those in?
Yeah, we can make those.
Dad joke. There we go.
I mean, what Justin, what if you just like injected, like, instead of form builder, you just like injected like AI form builder or something like that?
Yeah, I
And,
mean,
like,
I could just
this
make
wrapped up
my
all the
components,
metadata.
right? And like tell it to do it, right?
Yeah,
Let it
exactly.
build the form. I don't
Yeah,
care
let it
about-
build the form. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's worth
And,
pointing
and
out.
validate it and support multilingual
Absolutely.
and
Like, I
improve
don't want to get in the business of
accessibility.
validating the email address, or if you put a min-max link on
Yeah.
it, like just do it.
We can definitely still use a filter.
So like, it's probably worth pointing out here, like Mike mentioned the API that the various SDKs provide is a chat-based system, and we've rendered it as a chat here.
Yep.
But there's no requirement that we do so. We rendered it as a chat because that was a familiar interface for a lot of people to understand what was happening. It could look like anything.
Absolutely. It could look like a dashboard. Yeah. Show me trends of my e-commerce store and render it in real time using data from my data store or whatever it is. Show me graphs, show me trends. I can expose high charts or AG charts or AG grid or whatever it is to my LLM and let it actually draw out that data grid for me. Let it figure out, hey, this is the type of data that you're interested in. Let's go and do that. Or, okay, now I'm interested in this. Can you show me a comparison between these two different things? Or what about month over month comparison? Oh, sure, I can do that for you. Let me drop that into your chart.
I'm just imagining like the whole web experience or even like just a single page. Because right now I'm working on like providing subtext with audio. And so I'm imagining going to a site and just speaking with the site and like it using Hashbrown to like build out this UI of what we're talking about and what I'm trying to get done. And like, I don't know, I feel like it's gonna, this is just, I'm really excited. I can't wait.
That's why, like, showing that having your components in your Hashbrown, right, is like key, right? Because then you could do exactly that. Like my mind's racing with all that stuff of like, look, if I just build up my component set, I feed it to it, and I use natural language to say, hey, go kind of just create this UX journey on the fly. Here's all the bits and pieces. It handles it for me. Like,
you guys were even talking about like mental health and how like that's important to you. And I was imagining like, the user sounds kind of sad or low energy. So like all of a sudden our components go into dark mode and they fade as we're like, you know what I mean? Like as we're working back and forth on whatever it is, like
some emo.
That's why we're focused on this word like joyful, because I think there's something really joyful about this idea that, in a traditional web app, we ask our users to take on a lot of cognitive load about knowing the way we've reasoned or like laid out our application. They have to know where to go, how to get there. They need to know how to navigate from one page to the next. But with apps built with Hashbrown, I think we had the opportunity to really break that model where users can kind of give us their thoughts, what they're trying to accomplish. And then we use these LLMs not to generate content or anything like that, but just to orchestrate our components and our services on behalf of the user and give them a UI that matches what they're trying to do. Like, to me, that's what I want to do with AI,
It's magical, but it's also nightmarish to like imagine the debugging this situation, right? Of like, what went wrong?
That's true. That's true.
Absolutely.
They were a little too sad. The contrast wasn't good enough, right? Like
it showed them all white, super bright, flashy, right? But like that's the history, right? The state management history that you've got there. Now you can theoretically maybe replay that journey.
Yeah.
Store it, maybe replay it.
Maybe there's still space for a front end observability tool play here, Mike. I don't know. We'll see.
But look, Alyssa, if we're embracing AI and letting it do its things, like we got to just be embracing it. Like build the UI, hopefully for everybody. Like, okay,
I'm here for it, man.
Managing UI. Just go full bore.
Yeah. One of the benefits of this approach too that we really want to highlight is I mentioned RAG, or the idea of doing like data retrieval with LLMs. And in the current approach, you're using the LLM to generate a lot of text based on that knowledge. And because you're asking it to generate like sometimes paragraphs of text based on this knowledge, it has the opportunity to subtly hallucinate or create facts that don't really exist. But with Hashbrown, we're not actually asking it to tell us what the scenes are. Like, it didn't give me a paragraph describing the scenes. Instead, it just gave me the UUIDs of the scenes. And then I passed that off to my Angular component to show a really solid, like polished user experience. And so like, it's totally different when the LLM makes an incorrect error in a paragraph versus when it generates a bad UUID. Because as a developer, I can easily cope with a bad UUID, but I can't cope with it generating a fact that's not true. And so we really think this idea of UI chat just completely complements RAG and like helps you reduce the number of hallucinations and lets you give users like human polished user experience that the AI has just orchestrated based on its knowledge graph.
And because we have authoring over those components, we can trust them, right? Like there's a certain amount of trust, whether we're like a financial application or a stock-based application. Like I'm building that user experience and I have full control over that. And so I can use generative UI to build on top of my trusted layer of components that I know the users are either already familiar with in my application or I have control over. And so if it gives me hallucinates a UUID, I can deal with that error message. I don't have to, yeah. So I think really well said, Mike.
Yep. All right, I'm going to level it up one more time, and then we'll have lots of ideas, I think, of where we could take this tech.
Where are you going to go from here? What's the
Yeah.
next level? Let's see.
We're not
I don't
even
believe you.
done. Like, there's more.
What
There's
if
more.
we, Mike? There's nowhere else. We can't. I mean, I don't.
Well, I mean, Justin, you know that like LLMs are really good at writing code, right? So what if we let the LLM actually do that? And what if we take that code and what if we actually run that code?
Yeah.
Like, let's see what happens.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask chat. I've added lights to my guest bedroom. I have a standing lamp with 3 bulbs. Let's call them top, middle, bottom, and a desk lamp. Also create scenes that turn them on, off, and dimmed to 20%. Like, this is a complex query that would have to do a lot of work to actually fulfill this. And so with Hashbrown, we're taking this idea that it's good at writing scripts and leveraging it as a capability. So you can see that it's writing and running some scripts. We can see that it actually set up those guest bedroom lights for me on the left and created scenes for me as well. We can see that in the response here, all the lights that it just generated for me along with those scenes. The way that it worked is I'll go ahead and open up the Chrome DevTools and we can kind of introspect this. So I'm going to go into this message list and we're going to look for one of these tool calls here. And here's one where it called a tool called JavaScript. And it gave it some code and it wrote this entire bit of JavaScript to create these lights and scenes for me. And the way that this worked in my application code is I'm going to go back to my UI chat resource and you can see that I've created a tool called tool JavaScript and I've provided it a runtime. Hashbrown comes with a JavaScript runtime built in WebAssembly that lets you safely execute LLM generated JavaScript directly in the browser. And inside of that runtime, you can expose functions to the LLM to orchestrate. So I've given it functions to get lights, add lights, and create scenes. I'm using Skillet to define these inputs and outputs. And if you go look at what happens underneath the hood, we actually translate these inputs and output types into TypeScript instead of JSON schema to help the LLM or guide the LLM, not just how to call these functions, but also what data it's going to get as a result of calling these functions. One of the really awesome parts of Hashbrown's JavaScript runtime is that it's synchronous inside of the runtime, but asynchronous on the host. So all of these handlers can do asynchronous work. They can call or make network requests. They can fetch data, do some like complex bit of orchestration. But inside of the runtime, these are actually synchronous functions according to the LLM. What that means is that we're like really improving the success rate that the LLM can write scripts against these service layers. It's not having to think about how to do like async control flow or error handling. We're trusting the Angular developer to have done that on the LLM's behalf. And the LLM can just write code that's orchestrating these various functions that are exposed to it inside of that runtime.
So it ends up being very, just kind of do this, then do this, then do this. Very simple, like you would write a script, a utility script.
Yeah.
I think another good use case for this is like math. LLMs are traditionally like really poor at doing math, right? And so if you're building
that today, everyone says they're bad at math.
they generally are.
Yeah.
And so Mike's going to show a demo here of getting an average brightness of the light. It'll oftentimes hallucinate and come up with things that are incorrect. And one of the things that Level of App does is we work a lot with financial customers and fintech startups. And like math is kind of important when it comes to like fintechs, kind of matters. And so like like having the LLM hallucinate and like try to come up with things like that is like that can be risky, honestly. And that can like be like the breaking point for like compliance internally to allow something like this to go to production. And so with using the JavaScript runtime, we can actually just allow the LLM to do what it's good at, which is write the code. Let us run that safely and securely. And we can compute that on the user's machine. So you don't have to have tokens that are being expended by it. We can run that on the user's machine, determine that, and then tell the LLM, here's the actual average of the brightness of the lights. So don't worry about it. Like, we'll take that and we'll run that code for you.
What kind of voodoo orchestration did you just
I
describe?
know, dude.
What the frick?
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Is that crazy?
So we're leveraging this, like the AI providers know that these things are bad at math. And if you've used ChatGPT enough, you might have seen that it actually does something similar. It'll write some Python code that gets run on an OpenAI server somewhere to help reinforce whatever its math response is. And they accomplish that by training these LLMs that, hey, if you detect a mathematical question, reach for this Python.
Write the code. Yeah.
And we're just taking full advantage of the fact that these models have been trained with these instructions. And we provided it a similar JavaScript tool with the same kind of language as those Python tools that they've been trained with. And yeah, it just reaches for it so consistently. Like it didn't require any prompting on my part. I asked it a math question. It knew I had a JavaScript tool. We can see the little bit of JavaScript that it wrote. It took all the lightnesses or brightnesses in an array. It reduced them down to an average, and then it spit it back out and used that in its response back to the user. And it just kind of works really consistently.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that's also like, I think like grounding is a good point here. Like we're really grounding the LLM through the use of this tool JavaScript. I think there's also an opportunity for just cost saving too, right? Instead of relying on the LLM for a lot of stuff, if there's things that you want grounded and maybe some cost savings around, if you can execute that on the client machine, you can save some tokens. And so there's also an opportunity for you to like improve the efficiency and the performance of like your integration with an AI LLM in the browser. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity here. Yeah.
Yeah, and a traditional like tool calling flow, like if this were done with say an MCP style tool calling flow, it would have had to have called a lot of tools that have actually created
and back and forth. It's very chatty.
Yeah, super chatty, takes a long time, it's expensive, paying for tokens. But by instead saying, no, just give me the JavaScript that does it, you can do it in far fewer tool calls. You're passing way less data or context into your chat state, and you're paying less money for the LLM to do this work.
It might be an opportunity also just in terms of like security of data too, like not exposing as much data to the LLM and keeping that data still like in the context of a user session on the browser that you have control over, and allowing the LLM to like write code against that, but you still keep that data, if kind of proprietary or secure data, like still in the session of the browser, which you're already doing today if you're building a financial application or something like that. And so you already kind of trust that user session, you've kind of secured things down. Like you rely on that today. So instead of like leaking that data potentially to an LLM provider, you can kind of keep that data secure. So I think there's also like a compliance security aspect of it here that we're still discovering and learning more about. So I don't know exactly what it means, but that's like one of the ideas that we just, we keep tossing around.
We had a show this morning that was talking a lot about like whether you're using like local resources to kind of run that data, or you're using external and making those calls, but yours is kind of a hybrid, which is like wicked cool. And I love that you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, like you're saying. So it's really, really powerful.
Yeah. Hashbrown is saying LLMs are good at these things. They're good at generating like simple code. I don't think it can generate whole apps, but it is good at some small amount of code. It's good at generating structured data. It's good at generating natural language. What if we take all those things and just make them capabilities that we as developers can use to build like new user interfaces that we've not even really thought of before? I don't know.
It's just so really cool.
But at the same time, like if there's something it isn't as good at, like figuring out an API call, well, because you can call any part of anything in your app from a tool, you can access a store, you can call an API, you could inject sort of anything into the context that you can get from your store. So it's extremely flexible.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And, you started out like in the beginning of the journey saying, hey, look, we took a lot of time to caretake for our API of this and like really be thoughtful for it. Yes. Fully had no doubt that you did, right? But like now you see the stuff, it's like you did, but then you also did next level with that. Like this is just like the like you said, the joy, like you can see the API surface of Hashbrown and the joy that it can be for using it, and all the things that it does that you're showing us right now, like is super impressive. So Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
that's awesome.
The thoroughness of the type safety here, I think Mike kind of hit on it a little bit, but like I think you'll find as a developer, like our expectations, I think, in terms of like strict typing and kind of having these build time checks is really high, and that's a good thing. And so we tried to meet that same high bar with an alpha release. And so when you go in and you start using the handlers and the inputs and you're providing schema, I don't know, Mike, if you showed a little bit of the demo. I was popping back and forth with the chat. Like if you have an input called light ID and you just call it light, like you're going to get TypeScript's going to say, no, it's a light ID. And if you try to pass it a string and it wants a number, it's going to say, nope, that's not going to work. And so Mike has done an incredible job, like wrangling the TypeScript definitions in like a mind-blowing way. And so that's just, we wanted to meet that expectation right off the bat. As developers, this is a developer tool, right? And so if I just start throwing any's around and all this kind of stuff, like, nope. If you're doing that, I'm not.
Like, come on, we'd understand
I'm
it's an
not
open
shaming
source
you,
project,
dog.
Alpha. That's
I'm not
fine.
shaming you.
You're like,
It's
no.
But like, but Mike is like, we're not doing that. So it's like, yeah, we built this at like, and some of the types are just like crazy good. And so I think you'll find that once you start working with Hashbrown, that it's a developer tool that's going to work the way you expect right out of the box. And so that's something I think I'm really proud about, and definitely want to give huge kudos to Mike on this, because he wrote a lot of the TypeScript. Yeah, nice. Mike wrote a lot of the definitions for it and some of the stuff, and like it just is mind blowing. So hopefully you'll appreciate not just the API service, like you said, Justin. I think we've been really thoughtful with that, but we've also gone that next level and made sure that everything that you expect as a TypeScript developer is there.
I am so and you do React? Like what?
Yeah.
Oh yes, that too.
Oh, by the way,
also
we
do
did
that.
it over here too. What? Do you want to just
Yeah.
like real quick explain how you're everywhere now?
So Brian and I started Live App like, well, we're going to be an Angular consultancy and do a lot of Angular consulting, and then we do almost exclusively React work, which has been great.
A lot of next. Don't touch Mike. You're not supposed to tell them. We're Angular GDEs. But we write a lot of React.
Yeah.
We get paid to write a lot of React.
We get paid to write a lot
You're
of React.
saying it was just like no big deal to like whip it out for both. You're just like,
No,
not
we should give a
no
shout
big
out to
deal.
UG. Like we have had, it's not just the three of us on the so we want Hashbrown to be, it's open source, it's MIT licensed, it's free to use. So if we haven't said that already, go check out the repo. And we do have outside collaborators like UG Wilson. So I want to give a shout out to him because he did a lot of the work on the React side of things. And so, we're trying to form a community around this. It certainly is like you're looking at kind of the core maintainers here. And hopefully UG will be on this screen soon. Big shout out to it's been a team effort.
For sure.
Cool. My goodness, I am just blown away, and honestly super excited to go and start working with it. I'm just so grateful you guys came on so last minute to show it off. I was like, we got to get this out here. We got to publicize this. But is there anything that we did not touch on, whether inside or outside of Hashbrown, that you three wanted to highlight for today?
Yeah, I want to call it just a few quick things. If you want to learn more, it's hashbrown.dev. We have running examples inside of StackBlitz. So if you want to play with what we've just shown you, you can run those in your browser. You will need an OpenAI API key to try out the browser-based examples. Like I said at the top, we support not just OpenAI, but we also support the Gemini models from Google. We support calling OpenAI models from Azure's AI Foundry. So if you're in the Azure world and you want to stay in the Azure world, we support that too. And then we also support models from a company called Writer. My good friend in the Angular community, Sam Julien, he works at Writer, and they create LLMs that have much tighter controls around training on copyrighted materials. They also have really great data retention policies and sort of have built an enterprise-focused large language model. So if you're an enterprise and you're kind of concerned about some of those things, I think Hashbrown and Writer really play well with you too.
Yeah, I guess I'll also just pitch the enterprise thing. We're just getting started with Hashbrown. It is an alpha release. So I think 0.11 is out there on NPM, and we're going to continue to iterate and maintain this thing. We're definitely focused on building this for the long term. Once we get to stability and kind of those things, we will have a public release of 1.0. And then we're going to be offering to enterprises long-term support once we have a public release, a 1.0. And so we'll be able to offer you kind of extended long-term support. So that way you can rely on Hashbrown in your enterprise applications. And so we don't have specifics on that yet, but that'll be coming kind of from us as we march towards that 1.0 release. And yeah, we're committed to also multi different mediums, right? So right now, today, we're supporting text and text streaming, but we do anticipate having additional kind of features in the application, the framework to support audio, video, images, and different things like that. So there's a lot of work to be done. Mike and I are barely, like, we're just exhausted, but in like a really fun way. And so we expect more things to come. So just kind of, yeah, stay tuned. And if you're interested in working on open source and you want to join us, certainly reach out. We're looking to build a community around this, and it is open source. Level of App will continue to provide like enterprise support and all of these kinds of things, but it will certainly be an open source project and MIT licensed.
I'm just so impressed right now. I'm so excited. Ben, do you have anything you want to shout out as well?
Somebody asked me if I do tea or coffee when I code, and I don't. I'm a little more extreme than that.
Brought to you by.
Oh my gosh, Hashbrown, brought to you by Mountain Dew. I love it.
We've been having a blast, by the way. I don't know if you could tell, but like we're just like, it's been so fun to just get to do this together as a team and to build this and to tell people about it. We're obviously excited about it. So yeah, we're going to be taking it kind of on the road. And so Mike and I are headed in a week and a half, Mike, 2 weeks. We're headed to Rome. We'll be at NG Rome. We did get it, Ben. We bought our flights yesterday, so just so you know, we're going.
Yay!
And yeah, so we'll be in Rome. We're intending on having a big presence, hopefully at Angular Connect. We're doing a webinar for NGConf, probably a couple of webinars. We're going to be on the Angular meetup soon to talk about that. We'll also be at NGConf in the fall. So come talk to us. We're just Angular developers that love building really cool UIs, and the Hashbrown is allowing us to do that in ways we never thought possible. And so we're excited. And so come join us and let's go out and build some really joyful AI-powered user experiences.
I love it. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. Justin, you have any comments before we wrap?
No, I mean, just before you hit beta, you got to get those stickers made. Everybody's going to need some stickers.
Oh, we got to get stickers ordered.
I'm doing that for our viewers. Our viewers love.
You couldn't imagine the swag discussions we've had about potatoes and things.
Potato swag discussions. I feel like those should be live streamed. I'm just saying, content it could be.
Yeah, did you know there's companies that will print text on a potato that you can then ship to people?
Stop it.
You can get a
Stop
picture.
Amazing.
A real potato.
A real potato.
It's like a laser.
I love our world. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you three so much for coming on this afternoon.
Yeah.
It has been so freaking cool. Safe travels, and I cannot wait to dive in to Hashbrown as well as the community that you're creating. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
We'll see you all on the next one.